so we're very much appreciate y'all being here today. And our moderator is going to run the panel is Lonnie, who I first met him when he was the county judge of Houston County, and then later he worked for the Texas Association of Counties, and now he's head of the East Texas Council of Government, which has 11 counties, 12 counties, thereabouts, most of which, well, they're all in my Senate district. And so the panel today is about infrastructure. Infrastructure means different things to different people. I think most of you probably think in terms of transportation, highways, bridges, things like that. Infrastructure is a much wider area. So in the transportation field, you not only have roads, you have your mass transit, you've got rail, very important component. You have waterways, so our seaports and our navigation districts are extremely important to the state of Texas. When we're pumping oil here, where does it go? It leaves East Texas, it goes to the coast, it's processed and ends up on ships. A lot of it heading out. You've got aviation, airports, a lot of general aviation airports. I know some of y'all working with your local airports. You've got broadband, which we've got the premier author of the broadband bill, Trent, is here. So broadband is infrastructure, but you've also got water and wastewater in your communities, which is a real important thing, a lot of small rural communities, things like that. So infrastructure, electricity, the grid, you assume when you walk in your house, you flip the switch, the lights will come on. That's not always the case. And so it's something that we get involved in as a legislature, trying to make sure that we're always ahead of the curve. And so it's a much wider thing than just roads. So I appreciate y'all being here for this. I'm going to be sitting on the panel, so we'll now turn it over to Lonnie. I still call you judge.
Thank you, Your Majesty. All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank all of you for being here with us. And you know, we always start with highways, but I'm going to do something different today. I'm going to start with some of that newfangled infrastructure, broadband. And Senator Nichols mentioned I guess we could say we've got the two fathers of broadband here with us today, because Representative Ashby has been the chief author in the House, and Senator Nichols has been the chief author in the Senate of the broadband legislation that's been great for Texas, in my opinion. I want to ask you about broadband to start with. And we're in rural Texas today. We know there's a tremendous amount of funding coming down. The state has appropriated a lot of money, and the federal government has appropriated even more that's going to flow through the Texas Broadband Development Office. I'm worried about sustainability. So I want to ask for any thoughts you have about the concern that if there's enough money to build out broadband at every one of these rural houses in deep East Texas and other parts of rural Texas, are you concerned about the ability to sustain that service and that network if the subsidies go away? You know, I think we're looking at so much money coming down that we can't expect all this money just going to continue to flow down from Washington. So I want to hear your thoughts about sustainability, and I'll start with you, Representative Ashby.
All right, well, first off, thank you for allowing me to be here today as part of this distinguished panel. It's great to be back in the oldest city in Texas, and to be along with a couple of my friends, and I don't want to leave my good friend, my house colleague, Cody Harris out. You know, somebody has to put their name on the bill, but in this case, in terms of broadband, and more specifically for us that are blessed to live in rural East Texas, this is a rural issue, and the rural caucus in both the House and the Senate, you know, to a man or to a woman, work very diligently on this issue. So this is an issue that a lot of folks are passionate about, and of course, no one more than the people that need it. And just like Senator Nichols and Representative Harris, I represent a lot of people that don't have access to broadband, as is defined by the federal government. And so, as was talked about on the education panel, as was talked about on the last panel with healthcare, I think we can all agree now that broadband is no longer a luxury, it is absolute necessity. And nowhere did we see that more apparent than what we saw as we were going through COVID. And I'm setting the stage here a little bit, Lonnie, so give me a little bit of some
You got as
leeway.
much rope as you need.
Okay, give me a little rope here, because we've come a long ways in a short period, but I want to make sure people understand kind of how we got here. One of the things, not that I can point to a lot, but one of the positives that came out of the pandemic was it provided a persuasive narrative for those of us that are being blessed to live in rural Texas, all parts of rural Texas. When we were thrust into an environment where, as an example, the Texas Education Agency said to all of our schools across over 1,000 schools across the state of Texas, most of which are in rural parts of the state, that because we can't meet in person, we have to go to a virtual learning environment. Well, in theory, that's a great idea. But in practicality, in many parts of our region here in East Texas, that's not reality. And so we were all hearing from our constituents, moms and dads, school board members, teachers, superintendents, Trent, this is not going to work. You know, people they don't have, you know, in a lot of cases, you know, they don't have internet, much less broadband. And so they're having to drive to a local McDonald's or gas station and offer public Wi-Fi just to download their homework assignments. And so all that to say, when we met in 2023 for that session, there were a lot of rural members that were like-minded that if we do nothing else this session, we have to try to make sure that we are moving the needle in terms of accessibility to internet and more specifically broadband services. And so we have worked very diligently the last couple of sessions, and we have made great progress. But as you all know, the wheels of government turn slow. I'm proud to say we stood up a full-time broadband development office, the BDO as we'll call it, that's housed at our Controller of Public Accounts under the auspices of Controller Glenn Hager. We started with 5 full-time employees in 2023. They worked very diligently to map the state of Texas to try to find out where we have broadband, and more importantly, where we don't. And so that was very helpful and very timely. In the question that Lonnie just asked, he referenced the historic amount of federal funding that all states are going to receive for this purpose of connecting Americans, and in our case, connecting Texans to broadband. And so what we have tried to do is to make sure that we are positioned as a state to take advantage of the $3.3 billion through the BEAD program, which was part of the Federal Jobs Act in 2021, and here we are in 2024 talking about it, and we're waiting on that funding. But it is about to come, probably later this year is what we're being told. So we have positioned the state to take advantage of that. This last session with Senator Nichols and Cody's help, we were able to put before you, the voters of Texas, in last November, the creation of a broadband infrastructure fund to the tune of $1.5 billion. And let the voters decide if that is something that is appropriate, is something that will be helpful. And of course, while we think about it in rural Texas in terms of an accessibility issue, in our urban and suburban parts of the state, it's also connectivity, but it's affordability. And that is a component of this program as well. And so this is something that's going to benefit all Texans, no matter what your zip code or where you live. But to answer your question, Lonnie, that would be a welcome problem to talk about sustainability. I mean, at this point, I think we're still, you know, wanting to see the dirt turn, the shovels in the ground, and, you know, whether it's fiber or wireless, satellite, whatever that solution is for your community, your county, we want to see those switches turned on. So that's where we're focused right now. And I'm really excited about the next 18 months to 2 years as far as I think accessibility for a lot of communities that don't have it. But I think the issue, and I'm not going to use the word subsidy because that's not really what's going on here. What the legislature has done with the state funding portion of what we're talking about, the $1.5 billion, and some of that was for Next Generation 911, so really it's about $1.1 billion. What we're talking about is incentivizing providers or communities where, in some cases, it's a city that's decided to provide this service. We're gonna allow, from the federal funding is about 75% of the cost of the program. Whatever that is, the federal government said we'll pick up 75% if they qualify and are approved. The state has said, and this really, I'm gonna give credit to Senator Nichols, because this was really his idea. Controller Hager said, hey, we've got a lot of rural communities that just can't, because of the cost of broadband, there's no way they can afford the 25% match. So what we have done now is create a program in the state of Texas with our state funding that said, on a case-by-case basis, on an application-by-application basis, we're gonna look at that applicant. Let's use the example of an internet service provider. They say, I saw Judge Boyd from St. Augustine County here a second ago. Let's use St. Augustine as an example, or Ed, let's use Jasper, since you're sitting right there. What we're gonna say is if an ISP comes in and says that we are willing to lay fiber to Jasper or Brookland or any community in Jasper County, we want to do it, and we're willing to put our skin into the game up to an amount equivalent to, say, 15% of whatever that 25% number is. And so in that case, the state of Texas would really be on the hook just for the 10%. So it really does continue a competitive market. The government's not getting involved in manipulating that. We're just providing that last dollar, that middle mile, to make sure that we get folks connected. But once they're connected, it really becomes a sustainability issue, and that's a problem, again, that we don't have currently, but I'm sure that when we get to that point, Lonnie, that working with the private provider, I think we'll find some solutions that will work for all Texans.
Representative Harris, you want to add any to that, or your thoughts?
Trent did a great job in covering the details. All I want to point out is, no legislation is easy to pass. Every piece of legislation, whether it's naming a highway or anything else, is very, very difficult to do, to get across both chambers through committees. And I just can't say enough about these two men and the work that they did in the heavy lift on broadband access for the state of Texas, for rural communities. They deserve everybody's round of applause for the work they've done.
Senator Nichols, your thoughts?
Your point was to sustainability, and Trent touched on it on the tail end of his comment. But when you're looking at most of the applicants, most of the people that are getting these grants to help pay for that infrastructure are operating companies. It might be an AT&T, it might be a Windstream in one community, it might be a Charter Communications somewhere else, it might be the electric co-op or the telephone co-op. And these are organizations who have a history of taking care of their infrastructure. And so they don't get the future revenues if a unit goes down. And so they've got skin in the game and a track record. And so I think that's important to your sustainability question. I think it's also important, I know we had somebody from the Temple Foundation here earlier, that they helped early on in this process I know Trent and I met with them early on, and they put resources in to help us with technical issues in the actual drafting of the initial legislation. And so I know that he filed it in the House, I filed it in the Senate. There were 5 members in the Senate who had bills filed for broadband. And Kelly Hancock, Senator Hancock, is still here. He was the chair of the committee at the time, and he had a bill. Charles Perry, Panhandle guy, he had a bill. Royce West, who was mentioned earlier, was supposed to be here today. He had a bill. We had a bill. And what we ended up doing is all getting together and taking the best ideas from each of those bills and putting them into one. And the House matched up. Everything was matched up, but you don't usually get that. And so they're identical. And it was totally bipartisan. And I think it is important, the comments you made. We knew we had a problem and an issue that needed to be solved a long time ago when broadband and internet became very important. But nobody else in the state really cared until COVID. And when the state shut down and these kids couldn't go to school, It wasn't just the rural areas. They were amazed in the urban areas, how many kids went on and didn't have internet. Maybe they couldn't afford it. Maybe they were in a community, there were a lot, so it became a statewide issue. And until that hit, I don't think we would have had the, ability to get the state to come together on this issue.
One more follow-up on broadband, and then we'll move on to other infrastructure topics. But with the next session of the legislature, is there still some pending business that, in your opinion, needs to be addressed, next session to even take us to the next step? And whoever wants to jump in and answer that.
I would say there's nothing pressing right now. Cody's gonna laugh when I say this, but, once you step out there, you being the legislature steps out there on a big topic, usually for a few sessions, there's what we call cleanup bills. And so I could see a cleanup bill next session, and working with the BDO, ways we can improve current programs, maybe create new programs for accessibility, et cetera. But no, there's really, in my mind, there's nothing pressing right now that we must do in the area of broadband.
I agree, it's gonna be a main cleanup. Broadband office is keeping real close with the federal government. The U.S. Congress has turned over most of the responsibilities to what they call a BEAD council or committee, broadband equity, something, I don't know what it all stands for. But they're the ones who are guiding it. They changed the rules, and we have to change ours along the way to match up if we think those are positive changes, which I think we did. And so it'll be cleaned up.
Okay, let's talk about highways. And we're looking at Mr. Transportation here on this end of the table. So
The Oracle.
I feel the need to address this to you first, but the toss-up question is, what's the status of our highway infrastructure? I know there's been a lot of extra funding going to highways over the last couple of sessions. Some of the legislation I think you sponsored, that there's some of that rainy day fund to spill over into the highway fund. Are we doing enough? Is there a need for more? And what's your general assessment of our highway infrastructure in Texas, and in particular here in our part of Texas?
We are the envy of the nation, Texas is, because we have a highway program that is not dependent on the federal government. We want our federal money, we want our fair share, we certainly send enough up there. We only get about 76% of the money back that we send up there. Some states get twice as much. They'll send $1 up, they'll get $2 back. So we knew a long time ago, we need to have our own funding. So you mentioned oil and gas, and that's a component. A couple of sessions back, well, a decade ago, I guess, we added some more things. So now when you buy a car, a portion of your sales tax on your car goes to the roadway and bridges to help support the infrastructure. Oil and gas, the prices have shot up, the volume has shot up. So the revenues from that proposition, constitutional amendment, have also shot up. And you can't just keep pouring money in and expect everything to work right. Money doesn't solve everything. It's certainly nice, it solves a lot of problems, but you've got to ramp this whole thing up. Earlier panels were talking about nurses. You can build hospitals, but if you don't have doctors and nurses, it doesn't work. And so the engineering industry is gearing up. The highway construction industry has continued to gear up. And as that funding has come in, and we're trying to get all this stuff balanced right now and see where this thing's gonna go. But as long as we're a state that's growing, also 90% or not 95% of the population growth is in the urban, suburban areas. And they're so concentrated, those are the most expensive transportation projects on the planet, to try to build freeways inside of a crowded area like those major cities. And I know people in the rural areas think, golly, every time they talk about transportation, the big urbans get all the money. They get big projects, but it's really just the opposite. It's the urban, suburban parts of the state who subsidize the rural parts of the state. Urban, suburban contributes probably 87% of of all the fuel tax and vehicle registration fees and stuff, like 87%. The rural areas, that's where all the highway miles are. I mean, the maintenance on those things is extremely high. We are getting a good portion, I would say, more than our share. We've been needing it because we've been starved for it for so many years. And it's a balancing act there, and the legislature looks at all these numbers and they try to address it. And so we're getting our fair share as well. But at some point, I would say, in the next, not this session, maybe the next or the next, I think you probably, once we know and there's a good consensus of what that number needs to be, we may have to come back and adjust it and go after some more revenue.
Representative Harris, how about the state of transportation, highways and House District 8?
You know, I think wherever you are in the state of Texas, particularly in East Texas, we're pretty spoiled. We've got fantastic highway systems and roadways, even down to the county level in most counties where you've got blacktop roads instead of the old red dirt roads in a lot of them, which doesn't have anything to do with the state really. But, you know, I think it's important for Texas to get outside of the state of Texas and just go to Louisiana and travel. Man, we've got it going really well. It's a huge testament to Senator Nichols and all the work that he's done over his years in the Senate leading the Transportation Committee. And I think East Texas has definitely benefited from his service in that area.
Amen. Amen to that, and I'll just echo what Cody was saying. Last weekend, my wife and I had to go to Baton Rouge, and I mean, as soon as you go over that line there, wow. And no disrespect to my friends from Oklahoma, but kind of the same there. We had to go up that way recently too. But yes, we're blessed to have great infrastructure, highway infrastructure here in the state of Texas. We want to continue that. I think with the leadership of Senator Nichols, Senator Hancock, and others that had been here a lot longer than Cody and I, the groundwork has been laid and we're benefiting from that. The only thing I would add is Cody and I sit on the House Transportation Committee, and of course Senator Nichols chairs the Senate Transportation Committee. We've heard a lot over the last really 2 sessions, maybe 3, but 2 in particular. We've heard a lot, seen a lot of bills filed as pertains to the proliferation of electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles. And of course, just common sense would dictate if you're not buying gasoline, you're not paying into the state highway fund through our gas tax. And so we're finally able to, because of the leadership of Senator Nichols and Chairman Panelists in the House, to have a bill and outlaw this session where we have an electric vehicle registration fee of $200 a year, which is about the average that the normal consumer pays in annual gas tax. So hopefully that will make sure that as we see more electric vehicles on the road, that we still have the income necessary to provide for the other.
And in your district, we're going from 0 interstate highways to where now within your district, there's going to be an intersection of 2 new interstate highways, I-69 and I-14. And we know these things take time, but do you have any inside information on when we might see I-69?
Senator Nichols is looking at me like, that's something I don't.
And then the other part of that is, it almost seems to me like the I-14 project is getting a lot more attention early on than I-69 did
I agree.
in its early days.
I agree. I'll start with I-69. Of course, all of you traveled, I'm sure, 59 down to Houston at some point in the last year or so. You've seen I-69, the signs popping up further north and north as you come towards Lufkin, Nacogdoches. Yes, so I bless represent Polk County. Polk County will be the next county that will be experiencing a project that will be under the formal title of an I-69 expansion project. I think my last briefing, I think there are 7 active I-69 segment projects going on right now. And then there's another 7 or 8 that are already funded, which would include Polk in that group. Over the next 3 to 5 years, start there. So, and then of course coming right up here, and I know I travel from Rusk County, so I go around towards Henderson a lot along around your loop here, love what they're doing here with the overpasses and what will happen to the 259 intersection. But that's part of some I-69, they're building out the I-69 standards as well. But I-14 has been really kind of exciting to talk about. For those of you who aren't familiar, I-14 is Highway 190 east-west connector that will come in, obviously, at the Louisiana border, Sabine River, and go all the way over towards Fort Hood. And there is a lot of discussion about that. I know the TxDOT is planning, they've already appropriated money to plan for I-14. We're still a ways off. There is no segment underway that I'm aware of as far as construction, at least in Deep East Texas, for I-14. But that is something that it does seem like it could happen, hopefully sooner rather than later.
I want to talk about water. I don't think I put this on your list, but I'm going to throw an easy question out there about water. There was a water summit in Lufkin recently. A lot of regional partners came together, water systems, and it just sort of clicked in my mind while sitting there listening to that we take our water for granted in East Texas. We've got so much of it, both in the ground and on the surface, yet being surrounded by all this water is one thing. The ability to have the infrastructure to get that clean water into everyone's home and business is something else. And I know Representative Harris, at least at one time, was chair of a water task force subcommittee. It escapes me, but I know you've got some experience dealing with this. And I'm just curious for your take on our water infrastructure and wastewater infrastructure in the state, and again, in particular in East Texas.
Yeah, to me, our water policy and water issues is one of the most critical issues that we face as a state, but it's one that goes under the radar so much. It does not sell headlines, doesn't make it on the mailers during primary season, but it's very, very important. And especially in East Texas, you're right, man, we've got an abundance of groundwater, and we're blessed for that, and the rest of the state wants it because they don't have it. From an infrastructure standpoint on water and wastewater, there are hundreds and hundreds of water service corporations, rural water corporations that they've got decades old pipes and pumps that are failing. And so just recently, on last November's ballot, I think it was a $1.5 billion fund that voters approved to start helping address the issue of maintenance for these water systems and build out for future systems. But honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg if we're really going to address that, because as the state of Texas grows, and I'm sure y'all have already heard it multiple times, 1,100 people a day move into the state of Texas. They're not bringing roads and pipes and water with them. And I read an interesting statistics earlier this week that of those 1,100 people, 300 of them are from California. So,
Let's have a prayer here.
That's right, exactly. So it's very critical, and it begins to tie in a lot of different aspects to other infrastructure concerns, like the electric grid, and when we're starting to talk about small modular reactors or advanced nuclear reactors to be a source of electric generation, those tie into water as well, because some of those technologies have the ability to desalinate water. And so you look at DFW, who's sitting on a literal ocean of brackish or salty groundwater, they can't use it right now because we don't have the technology at an economically feasible point to desalinate their groundwater. But if SMRs, small modular reactors, could be part of that equation, not only are we solving the electric generation problem, but we begin to solve the water problem at the same time. So I'm really excited about where the state is headed on this. And Senator Perry's been a huge leader in the Senate on water issues, and I know that the fund that we passed and the voters approved in November is just the beginning, and we're going to come back, I think, next session with another proposal for how we continue to address the water infrastructure needs to the state.
Any other thoughts about water, wastewater infrastructure?
Yes, where Cody, or the Harris was headed, and I'm on the working group with Senator Perry, and so I hear him talking about water, but and y'all mentioned it, but we have a lot of very old infrastructure. And one of the issues I've heard him talk about, and it's real, because I see it every day in our district, is these old rural water systems that economically people are barely able to pay for all their bills. I mean, you're talking about low income, that their systems are just shot. I know we've leaned on Angelina Nature's River Authority. I think Kelly Hoffman, are you here? There he is. You know, we asked them to take some of these things out. Sometimes it's fresh water, sometimes it's a wastewater system. And we have one, I know, in a neighboring county of Angelina. It was, for 10 years, TCEQ has said, you're in violation, you're in violation, you're in violation. And they can't get there because nobody's got the money, nobody's got the word. So we look to somebody like the Texas Water Development Board to help them. They loan grants. But if economically these people can't pay for the grant, then they don't qualify. And that's part of the problem we're trying to solve. So, Angelina Natchez, I know, took the system over because they were in violation constantly with TCEQ because it's a problem that needs to be solved. Immediately, they get letters from TCEQ saying, okay, you're in violation now. It's kind of, well, we knew that when we took it over, but we got to fix it. And the Water Development Board is saying, well, these people will never be able to pay the loan back. And so we're down there writing letters, working with the Water Development Board on this new money, trying to explain to them as they write their rules. Some of this money needs to go to these low-income areas where they're in these violations. That's the only way we're gonna get out of those. So we can't just shut down a community. You can't let them just, everything run into the creek. Need help. That's where we're headed. So it's a real serious issue. So it's not just here, it's all over the state, these similar issues.
That's right, and I'll just put a fine point on it and connect what Cody was saying with Senator Nichols. The new fund, the Texas Water Fund, right now, the Water Development Board is taking public comments on, how those funds should be distributed, what those programs should look like. And what Senator Nichols was saying, and again, that's one of many examples. I know there are examples in Nacogdoches County. The one he's talking about is my home county of Angelina, and we have multiple examples in my home county where you have small rural water supply systems with a limited number, a small number of people that are hooked up on that system, and there's just not enough revenue to replace that aging infrastructure. And so we penned a letter last week to the Water Development Board citing that as an example, but there's got to be a way for these communities across the state of Texas, not just in East Texas, to have adequate resources available to them to replace that aging infrastructure. Because not only do you potentially have a failing system, but you're also losing oceans of water underground. And when water availability is a problem, especially with thirsty folks in Senator Hancock's district and all across the state of Texas, we've got rural water supply systems that are losing, millions of gallons of water on a regular basis just to leaky pipes and whatnot. So this is one of those, to me, common sense solutions. We've got some funding available now, and I hope that the Water Development Board does the right thing and make that available to these rural communities that are desperately in need of it.
Senator Nichols, you mentioned ports and waterways in your introductory remarks, and so, correct me, does your district actually touch the coast? I know you get close to it if you don't, so we're gonna call you our coastal panelist here.
I am a coastal.
There you go. And what do we need to know about our ports and, of course, in this part of the state, our rivers and streams and lakes?
I've got Port of Orange, which is a small port. We do get traffic in and out of there. Port of Beaumont, which is huge. The Spain Nations Waterway, which is all the way down to Port Arthur. And that's one of the, probably third largest port in the nation, Northern Hemisphere. And it's where an incredible amount of our oil and gas top products come and go. But it's also the #1 port for the military. So when you hear about the United States shipping 1,000 tanks to the Middle East, it goes through that waterway. And so, yeah, so I'm real sensitive to that, and I'm certainly, as transportation chair, go visit all of the other ports. So Port of Houston, obviously, is a huge one. Corpus Christi, Victoria, all the way down to Brownville. And so I tour every one of those ports and try to keep up with those waterways. And so, things do change. Without those ports, Texas economy would be much smaller than it is. I know I talk to people up in the Panhandle, some of my friends up there in the legislature, and they're kind of going, why should I use tax money from the Panhandle to help those people down in Beaumont? I'm going, yeah, you know that big oil patch y'all got out there? Where do you think those pipes go? Where they go? You shut down those pipes, it's just gonna be all backed up. What are you gonna do with it? You're gonna put it on rails? Well, guess where the rails go? Same place. And so, it has a tremendous impact to the state. And, so we need to be thinking about that. This session, we actually funded, as a state, more on our waterways and ports in one session than we did in the history of the state of Texas. Nobody even knows it, or a few people know it, members of the legislature know it, but the people in southeast Texas know it. Christian Manuel was here in an earlier panel. He's from Port Arthur. He certainly knows it. But those waterways are extremely important and will continue.
And Representative Harris, the busier those ports are, the more demand for highways, because a lot of those things are being unloaded at the port and shipped up and down the highways through our part of the state and the rest of Texas.
That's right, and you, not only do you have the ocean ports, but you've got land ports as well, and it's why border security is such a critical issue for the state, because we've been investing as a state all of this money into our ports. And so, along the coast, but also in Laredo and McAllen and El Paso, where we've got billions of dollars worth of goods being transported across from Mexico and to Mexico. And so when the federal government allows the border to go unchecked and doesn't do their job in securing the border, that puts the investments that we've made in those ports at risk. And that's just considering just from a purely economic standpoint, not the crime, inflation, and everything else that we see that goes along with it. So many of these different things that we talk about that may seem like boring topics, like ports and highways and water and all of that, they all tie into other things that have impacts across the state as a whole. That's why, you know, whether you live in the Panhandle or Northeast Texas, border security does have an effect on you, whether you realize it or not. It has an economic effect on those land ports that are part of generating the economy that Texas is so proud to have.
You made a reference earlier, when we were talking about highways, that Texas is the envy of the nation. What about other infrastructure in Texas? How are we the envy of the nation when it comes to, you know, the other types of infrastructure we're talking about? How do you think we stack up? Are we doing enough? Are there particular areas where we should put more emphasis in the near future?
We've talked about several of them already. One of the emphasis is, of course, these small rural water systems. But one we have not talked about was electrical. I know, and it's something you don't hear about very often. I know when I go like to a political club meeting, and nobody's asking for more electricity. What are you doing for electricity today? But I think in terms of it, I guess I'm an engineer, and so I'm thinking in terms of every 2-year cycle. What kind of progress have we made on electricity, on all these kind of things? But you just assume when you walk into your house and you open the door, you reach over, hopefully on the right side, and you flip that switch and the lights come on. But it's because there was enough transmission lines and distribution lines and enough power to get us there. Well, we all learned during Uri a couple of years ago, the system fails. We have, when you're talking about, I'm not gonna say it's the envy of the nation, but it's pretty unique to the nation to have Texas has its own electrical grid, we take great pride in. Until the last couple of years, we've been kind of upset about it. But we decided to disconnect those that came before us. None of us were there when they did it. But about 25 years ago, they decided we do not want to be under federal jurisdiction. Electricity is too important. You don't know what the feds are gonna do. So every section of the state, right on the edges, that connected to a major transmission line with another state, we left that as a regulated market, so it falls under federal control. But everything inside, 85, 90% of the people in Texas live under what we call ERCOT. And that's the Texas grid. And so Texas controls it. Or we think we control it. And because the federal government has no jurisdiction over it whatsoever. And so it's a competitive market, and I know, so that's an area that I think people might be interested in. But and in the beginning, 25 years ago, you had a lot of coal, you had hydroelectric, you had nuclear, you've got natural gas and stuff like that. Now we've got, and I remember going to seminars 25 years ago, and every one of those was regulated. Every power plant was regulated. Every power plant was told how much you get paid per hour for generating electricity. And so the state Public Utility Commission had to literally study each one and tell everybody how much they get paid, so they guaranteed a certain return on their investment. And when they needed another power plant, they'd say, you put it in, we'll give you 10%, and 10% to run it. And so they just said, well, let's just let them compete with each other and let them bid for the electricity and make an open market out of it, which was pretty novel. And so that's what happened 25 years ago. And so the hydroelectric and the power and the coal and the gas all competed with who could put it on there the cheapest. There was this little thing called renewables on the chart. Little bitty yellow line at the top, I remember seeing it. They said, oh, that's renewables. That's gonna be wind and solar someday. And the federal government started subsidizing both of those. And that's where the money is. There's no guarantee. So these old power plants are running. And it's a shrinking percentage of the market as Texas grows. And that yellow band is now half of the entire chart. And it's renewable, totally dependent on subsidies from the federal government to the extent they can run and put power on the grid for $0. How would you like to compete against that and still make a profit? And who in the world would spend $1 billion to put a gas generation plant in the state of Texas and go totally at their own risk and compete against somebody who can make money putting it on there for $0? So nobody's investing. And that yellow thing keeps increasing, and when the wind quits blowing and the sun quits shining, which happened during Uri. Now, granted, some of the power plants, other traditional power plants shut down because of freezing. They couldn't get coal to run because it was all frozen in one big block. Some of the gas plants had weird things happen because of thermostats and stuff weren't used to that kind of cold weather. And it failed. And so we have been struggling session after session of how to fix it. And you talk about a push and pull. And it's a big lobby thing too, because there's a lot of money over here on each side. And each side wants they're pushing against the middle. And the members get torn in there. And there's a number of people that are trying to do the right thing, and yet we still haven't gotten there, in my opinion. Yet the yellow band keeps growing every session.
So if I could, real quick, to your point, Senator, just before we came up here, I read an article with a new projection saying that alternative energy sources are gonna receive over $430 billion in tax credits over the next 10 years. $430 billion. When Texas is built, our grid is built on a competitive market. How do those guys, or how are they supposed to compete when the federal government is subsidizing them with $430 billion? We have a problem that we have to figure out how to address that.
Is it feasible for the state to provide subsidies to natural gas-fired plants?
In my opinion, more subsidies isn't gonna fix it. I think we've got to incentivize new technologies like nuclear that offer the same clean solutions as the renewables, but they're reliable and they're dispatchable. Those are the two most important things when we consider energy generation, is reliability and dispatchability, in my opinion. And I mean, the battle between the state and the federal government, where the federal government has forcibly shut down our coal generation plants, that puts us in a difficult spot. And we've got to have people elected to Congress and Senate who are going to fight back and keep that from continuing.
Representative Ashby?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to your original question about our infrastructure in the nation. I would like to believe it is, and I think in a lot of categories, and we've got a lot of different categories here this morning. But I think one thing that we are doing right in the state of Texas is that what's been highlighted here with some examples today, but I think this gets lost in the discussion sometimes. But you know, when we meet every 2 years, the only bill we have to pass is a budget to operate our state government for the next 2 years. That's the only bill we constitutionally have to pass. And so in that budget, everybody is fighting for their priorities, right? I mean, that's our jobs, and fund government at whatever level that looks like. But one thing that we have done, and I'm going to use Proposition 1 and Proposition 7 when it comes to transportation funding, that Senator Nichols led that effort over a decade ago, but that's constitutionally dedicated funding that's off the table, but it goes directly to our state highway system. And I think that makes up about 35% of our total TxDOT funding. So it is a significant portion of funding. You've heard this morning us talk about the new broadband infrastructure fund. You heard just a second ago talking about the new, again, approved in November by the voters of Texas, the new Texas Water Fund. The beauty of that is that these are critical infrastructure needs for the state of a fast-growing state like the state of Texas, and yet we're not having to fight per se over these critical needs every 2 years, because we as a society, we as a state, as the citizens have said, we want to constitutionally set some funding aside to make sure we're taking care of some priorities. I think we can all agree are priorities for our state. And so I think that's important to mention. So when you talk about the future of Texas, the infrastructure, I think some of the things that we, the voters of Texas, have decided to do over the last 10 to 15 years really does set us on a trajectory that most states probably have not gone down this road. And so I think that's something that we need to take some pride in as Texans, that we've made some really smart decisions in terms of where our limited amount of taxpayer funding should go.
I think that's a good note to end on, and I think I see Travis trying to give us the hook over here. So let's thank our panelists.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you, panel. I'll stick around and do a photo. Trent, Cody, Senator, y'all stay close for a photo. All right, this will conclude our panels. At this point, we can make our way down the hall to the grand ballroom for our dinner. Congressman Pete Sessions will be our speaker. Looking forward to that.